June 3rd, 2026 is about 2 months away, and that deadline is extremely important for every SEC registered RIA under $1.5 billion in assets under management, and to be fully compliant for registration S&P amendments. Now, for the remainder of this video, I'm just going to do Reg S&P, so that way it's a little bit easier here. But currently, there is no threshold or no minimum threshold that does not apply. So it doesn't matter if you're a solo firm, it doesn't matter if you're a small firm. If you have 1.5 billion in assets under management or less, this unfortunately applies to you. And please don't come after me. I'm just the messenger in this case. But you need all 5 documents in place and operational by that date. And I'm going to be covering that in this video. And I'm not talking about drafted. I'm not talking about not in progress. I am talking implemented and documented. It is very important that you have both of those. And the SEC has made data protection a active examination focus for Reg S&P and is now named a priority. And that's the thing that has changed recently that most people don't actually know. How are you doing? My name is Harrison Barron from Secure Wealth IT. We help financial individuals, whether you're a broker dealer, an RIA, make sure that your systems run seamlessly and you are compliant with the, we'll call them alphabet agencies, because there's so many out there. And trust me, in our world, we've heard all of them. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can head over to our website at Secure Wealth IT. And hey, while you're there, you can actually check out a bunch of other stuff too. Not only do we have a ton of information about who we are, what we do, we want to make sure your computers run smoothly and all that good stuff. But also, if you want to go through and check out if you go under the free compliance readiness assessment, you can go through and start your assessment. You could do an RIA and it'll pre-fill out what you actually need to do, whether you're an expert or in a normal mode here, and begin answering your questions. I promise we don't share any of that information with anybody. I just want to make sure that you are aware that it actually exists, because it can be a kind of a pain in the butt to deal with, and we want to make it easier for you. And if you go through it and you're like, we need some more work, please reach out to us. We would be happy to help. So what is registration or Reg S&P, and why did it change? Reg S&P has been around since, believe it or not, the 2000s, and it came out with the GLBA, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and it has had a baseline level of privacy rules for financial firms. So it's nothing new. It's nothing that hasn't been around, but they've made amendments. And what changed in 2024 was specific. The amendments layered in concrete basically operational requirements like response timelines, vendor obligations, and documentation standards. And this is really important because this is what it's all based on. 4 new requirements stem from the latest amendments, indicating or inciting basically response programs, customer notifications, service provider due diligence, right? And that's you and who you're working with, and record keeping, which is really important. Big firms over 1.5 billion already had to comply by the December 2025 deadline, and now it's unfortunately your turn. And I say that because I'm just the messenger here, but it's kind of a pain in the butt because the big firms have already had to deal with it, and now unfortunately smaller firms have to deal with it. So what are the 4 new requirements that you really have to go through? Now, part 1 of these 4 is a written incident response program. So RIAs must develop, implement, and maintain written policies and procedures for incident response programs, basically, for reasonably designed to detect, respond to, and recover unauthorized access to customer information. Now, full transparency, this is something that we absolutely positively can help you with. But if you don't, or you're not working with a managed service provider or an MSSP, a security provider, right? This is something that you really have to be aware of. And unfortunately, this is not a template you can just download. I can't just give this to you. This is things that you have to have, and the SEC expects it to function in real time. So responding to things quickly. And these also include strategies to isolate compromised systems, basically a fancy word of there's a virus in the system, or maybe somebody has access that they shouldn't have, tracking login attempts, rotating admin credentials so that way you're resetting your password every set number of days, and enhancing monitoring tools to make sure that things don't just go awry and you're kind of hoping for the best. Now, the second part of this is probably the thing that everyone's going to be really angry at me for. And once again, I'm just the messenger in this case. You have to notify your clients within 30 days. All right. That is the most important thing. RIAs must notify their customers whose sensitive data was potentially compromised, and that is a message out to everybody, usually an email along with some physical mail, letting them know, hey, this is what's actually going on. This notification must describe the incident of what actually happened, the type of sensitive data that was involved, the data, right, that was actually involved, and then the contact details and any other recommendations to protect against identity theft. It stinks, but these are the things that are actually going out in place. You have to let the people know whose data was actually breached, what was actually breached, so that way they can take the necessary precautions to make sure this doesn't happen again to them in the future, and also letting them know, hey, this is what's happened. If you cannot identify which specific individuals were affected, the SEC requires that you notify everyone whose sensitive information resides in the compromised system. And that's kind of the final blow to all of this, because if you can't identify and you're not working with a technology provider already, and I promise this isn't a plug for us, but if you can't identify who it is, you have to send it out to everybody, because maybe it's just one client and it's not so bad. But if you can't with 100% certainty say it's only one account, it's a full message to everybody whose assets you manage and client information. Now, 3, vendor and service provider oversight. Vendors must notify the advisor of qualifying incidents within 72 hours of discovery. Vague contract language like prompt notice is increasingly viewed as inadequate. So now they're putting a timeline in place and not letting you have a very, very basic, we tried our best. 72 hours. If you don't know, that's 3 days. And you need to review every vendor contract absolutely thoroughly. And if your MSP, your custodian, or your CRM provider touches client data, they need a signed agreement that within that 72-hour, that has a signed agreement for that 72-hour clause to make sure that everybody is aware. Now, thankfully, if you're dealing with vendors, they probably already know this and it's already probably there. But if you've never looked at this, this is unfortunately something that you're going to have to start to pay attention to. And the SEC examiners stress that the need for heightened requirements monitoring third-party service providers and ensuring that they can detect and notify the RIA of a breach within 72 hours. So that means whoever you're working with has to have the technology to say, hey, we had a breach or something happened within that 72-hour period. That is the most important thing. Now, number 4, the last and most important thing, record keeping. And I'm sure you're probably already rolling your eyes at this one. I get it, because it's pretty much all we have to deal with. RAs must maintain detailed records of policies, incident responses, notification decisions, service provider oversights, and related correspondence for 5 years, with 2 years easily accessible. So that means you can file them away somewhere if you'd like to, or they have to be readily available. You can just search a file, or maybe it's a shared drive or some kind of secured place where you can save it and immediately access it within 2 years. In the technology world, it shouldn't be a problem, but hey, my job is to let you know what's actually happening. But this includes incidents where you investigated and decided not to notify. You still have to document why you decided not to notify. And that is one of a major shift, because if you decided not to notify, that's totally fine. But you have to document why you decided not to notify. And that's something frightening that most people are going to have to begin to deal with as well. Knowing that, hey, we decided to not let everybody know because of X reason, X reason, X reason. So what happens if you ignore this? And I do ask you for a quick favor. If you enjoy this kind of content, or you're an RIA, if you could hit that like button, subscribe button, notification bell, and share this video out with one of your colleagues, it would be tremendously helpful to our channel. But what happens if you ignore this? Please, once again, don't hate me. I'm just the messenger. But missing the deadline invites more than just a deficiency letter. Firms risk regulatory... right, they firms risk regulatory censure, client loss, public reputational damage, and near immediate audit trail requests from the SEC. It's not like a, hey, you know what, hopefully it doesn't happen. It is something that's going to be happening fairly quickly. In one Reg S-P enforcement case, a firm was fined a total of $35 million. That is a massive amount of money. And that was a large firm, but smaller firms are not safe either. Fines of $75,000 to $100,000 have been issued to smaller advisors for basic compliance failures. The fine is rarely the most expensive part. Remediation costs, loss of leadership time, reputational drag, client churn, and insurance implications add up very, very quickly, and this is something that is not going away. For the fiscal year of 2026, the SEC will examine the compliance with the 2024 amendments to Regulation S&P, so that way it is not a maybe. It is published on the SEC website, and there is no reason to not be compliant. It's not terribly challenging, but it is something that you're going to have to do, and it's another thing added to your plate. Once again, I'm just the messenger. So the common mistakes RIAs make that are smaller firms, less than that $1.5 billion in assets under management. They're using generic templates that reference the compliance team or IT security staff when you have neither. If you have those things, it's not a bad thing because then you can point that finger over to them and they should have these things. Also, if you're not updating your vendor contracts within 72 hours of a breach notification clause, that is a massive, massive problem. You have to have that in place. For most smaller RIAs, the 72-hour vendor requirements and the documentation obligations were the heaviest lifts so far that we have seen. And most gaps come from underestimating what the rules require and not following them, because they are fairly clear for all RIAs that fit that threshold. Whether or not you like it, that's where it is, and it's published on the SEC website. Keeping documentation scattered is a massive problem. You have to, look, we are all human, we all make mistakes, and all of our lives can get a little bit messy. But having this readily available, especially for that 2 years immediately accessible and 5 years of filed away storage, to be able to prove it is massively, massively important. And I promise you, if something does happen or you do have a breach in another area where this might fall outside of it, they are going to be looking for this too. It's just a matter of the fact. So what should you do right now? One, head over to our website, securewealthit.com. Feel free to go test out the tool and see how close you actually are to being compliant versus non-compliant. Maybe you realize, hey, we're doing a really good job, and I congratulate you for that. Or you're not doing such a good job, and maybe we should have a conversation. But make sure you go through that. Step 2 is review every vendor contract. Add the 72-hour notification clause where it's missing. It's super important, and it's one of the most important things that you could do right away. 3, build and update a written incident response plan so it reflects your actual team, your actual vendors, and your actual processes right off the bat, and you don't have to sit around and wait for this. Step 4, set up a record keeping system. I already mentioned this, but one place that you can have all of this, where it's structured, you can have versions controlled, any data that might be potentially even falling in that gray area can be stored there. And then 5, run a tabletop scenario. Walk through a fake breach. Now, I know that you're probably thinking, Harrison, how on earth do I do a fake breach? Just pretend, hey, okay, let's see. Can we see how much actually got breached, where it was, and then if we had to go through sending out that email, what are we actually letting people know? Hey, this is what actually happened. This is the most important stuff. If you need help with this, check us out, securewealthit.com. We are super friendly tech guys that would love to help you. And otherwise, best of luck. I have a ton of new content coming out. I took a little bit of a break. I've been very, very sick, but I'm very excited. You have about 10 weeks left, not to add any more pressure to your table, but I'll see you later, and best of luck.